Kevin Inoue here with another Fight Designer LLC video talking about 3D printed props this time. And what I'm looking at here specifically is the use of the 3D printer to make stunt doubles for other props. Now, I've already talked some about the use in printing prop guns, both training guns and prop firearms, on my YouTube channel, so I'll drop a link to that down at the bottom and maybe at the end of the video as well. But since I've already covered the prop guns on the YouTube Theatrical Firearms channel, I want to talk more about knives in the video here today, knives and other objects. Now, there's a couple ways this can come up. One is needing a safer double of something to use in a fight scene, as a double for a hero prop, an actual metal prop, and the other is for sort of effects props. So one thing that I was going to maybe use for a 48-hour horror film fest thing that I helped out with a little while back, I ended up not going with, but they had said we might, so I prepped some stuff, was a small hammer. Now, I have a couple different versions of rubber hammers, but none of them do I happen to have a real hammer that is an exact match for it, that's great for close-ups. Probably should do something about that at some point, but I wasn't going to go out and do a lot of shopping for a 48-hour film fest thing. I wanted something cheap and quick. And I had this small hammer that was a part of like a wall-hanging kit at some point that someone had in their dorm room, I think. And I found a file online, an STL file for a hammer. And so this was actually a fairly close match, not exact, but if we had an establishing shot of a steel hammer like this, and then swapped out to something like this in a quick shot, that would probably work just fine. It's obviously a lot lighter, which means it hurts less to get hit with. It's like 20% infill, PLA plus. And you know, I could take some time if I wanted to paint it up a little more exactly with the head and stuff like that. The handle's a little too long. That would be an easy fix if I wanted to try again. But the other cool thing about this is it allows me to swap out heads pretty easily in case I wanted to show that hammer getting like embedded in somebody, right? Again, this was 48-hour horror film fest, so we could have that, you know, the claw end, or one here somewhere. I've lost my head. I also have one for if they wanted to bury the hammer end into something and embed that. And yeah, if I wanted to go a little fancier and have like a plate that I could put on a costume and like bolt this to so it would stick, there's things you could do with that. And for that, the lightweight also really helps. But, you know, it was an interesting experiment, scaling things to try and match. But once you have it, it's really easy to make a version that is just printed partway embedded in the print plate, so that you have a version that is sort of a cutoff right away. Now, there's also things like kitchen knives, which are less likely to be something that people make stunt doubles of. It's more of a utilitarian thing. And for those of you who've seen me do some of my props for action filmmaking thing, you know, I have several versions of a kitchen knife thanks to working on Cash, Bullets, Blood, and Fistful of CA H years ago, and a fight in the kitchen there. So we had a steel one that could hang on a magnetic rack on the kitchen if it needed to. We had some cut-off versions. There's a stabbing through the hand gag and some other things where we needed a version like that to be held. I made a version that was going to be embedded in the hero's shoulder after it got thrown. And so this was underneath his costume sticking out. Later he has to reach back and grab it. Of course he couldn't reach, so I was back behind him holding another one. And at the time I made an aluminum version just using hardware store aluminum, so we could use this for any fight scenes in case they wanted to do some sort of melee combat using the kitchen knife. And this is nice and soft and blunt and lightweight.
I'm back, motherfucker. Fuck you, Cash! Fuck you!
Now they also make, you know, for Halloween costumes, Spirit Halloween store or whatever, you can buy plastic versions. This was one, and I like that it's so plastic, so flexible. This is great for if you want to like throw it across the room and not have it damage the set. But it's not the same size, and it's kind of not an ideal stunt double. And I don't have the ability to choose it in different sizes. But when it's a 3D printer file, you can scale things. So now here's an example of some 3D printed versions that are also in PLA+. They have at least some flex to them. They're super light, and they're just plastic. These have been painted. One of them has a epoxy coat on it, the other does not. I've done some things with printing out the little rivets in a different color, the blade in a different color. The handle slabs took a little bit of finishing. So it's not just like print ready to go. There's a little bit, some assembly required. Here's another one we decided not to use for that movie, but a wooden handle, just a cheap Goodwill one that I slightly blunted down. And here's a 3D printed version of basically the same thing. So would make for a pretty decent stunt double in any quick shot if you need it. And then of course, just like you can print out various different knives when you want to play. There's files out there for folding knives, for daggers, if you need to stab Caesar. Now this one has a metal bolt down through the middle to help give it a little bit more strength so it doesn't break quite as easily. The Jambia here do not, but they have this center ridge which helps keep it a lot stronger and is also sort of a defining feature of both Fujio and the Jambia. And I had fun with these. These are actually just paper mache scabbards. So I kind of dig the mix of high-tech and low-tech, using a paper mache and 3D printer together to print out period knives. I've got one of those actually in use right now with Cymbeline, one of the people who's hiding out in the caves has a hunting knife that they carry around that's 3D printed Viking knife, I think was how the STL file was listed, with a paper mache scabbard. So there's all sorts of designs out there, and I like that you can kind of scale them to try and match things. Oh, here's a leftover silver rivet from doing one of those kitchen knives. But of course there's a question of how durable are they. 3D printing does have a bit of a grain, depending on like the horizontal planes that it prints on. And so if you print against the grain, things can snap. Here's one that I was playing with a little bit. And this is the kind that's designed to have that metal rod down the middle. But the other question then is, when they do break, are they safe? Are they going to have jagged edges or not? Here's a failed print of a gun. You can kind of see there's this lattice stuff on the inside, but it is a hard plastic, and I have cut myself sometimes just trying to separate pieces. So there's a question of when it shatters, what does it look like? So there we go, freshly broken. And you can see there are some slightly jagged and uncomfortable bits. Now, I could not have broken that just by hitting someone with it, but by stabbing it and pushing, sure. And a better example, here's this knife. There we go, you can see the structure inside. Now I could choose to have more or less infill if I wanted it to have more or less mass or strength or weight. And I don't know enough yet about 3D printing to know the best advantages in terms of the structure. I do know that if I had chosen to print this at a diagonal instead of vertical, that it would have been more likely to snap on that diagonal. And that would create a wedge edge, sort of a tanto tip, that could be very dangerous. Now these, still some corners, I still wouldn't want to get stabbed with this by accident. But at least if it's stabbing on straight, it's not likely to go in deep. The ideal might be to actually print them flat. But that tends to mean having to do it in halves and glue it together, which is how I made that Viking knife that's up there now. For example, here's one that I started to print the wrong thing because the clicker dial on my CR10 mini printer makes it really easy to accidentally, as you push it, shift down to the next thing down the line. So these are printing in the wrong color, and by the time I caught it, they'd already printed some. But this would be an example of that Viking knife blade that was printed in halves with the intent of gluing them together. And I do think that can make it a little bit stronger because it does split up to some degree where the lattice is and things like that. And you can see at this thickness, it's fairly flexible. It didn't break until it got to about here. We can slow that down. Right. Oop, and that one still didn't break. So that's not bad there. Or I guess it's just where it's thicker. Oh, no, didn't break there either. Hey, so that's pretty good. That's not bad. Some of these designs have a bit of a tang. Usually not a full tang, but like a rat tail tang to help glue it together. Some of them do not, and those are going to be super weak because you're just gluing two pieces together and they're going to break right at that base. Like I said, the only way this design got around that is by being designed with a hole in the middle so that you put a metal bolt down through the center, and that gives you your tang. This one also had a printable scabbard that came with it. Some of them do not. So, is this a viable option for some props? Sure. If I have an actor who's like, I don't feel safe, we're using this dulled down paring knife that the props people got me because they ground it down on an angle grinder at a right angle and it's got burrs and sharp corners. Yeah, you could sand it down. Or you could just 3D print them a plastic one that would look fine at a distance. I was actually really pleased with how the one looked in assembly when I was sitting in the back of the hall. It did look metallic. But I wouldn't use them for heavy combat. These are not the same as rubber. Right. A purpose-made rubber knife, some of them are just a little too soft for stage and screen, unfortunately. But something like the cold steel rubber training knives, they're gonna have about the same level of stiffness, but they're not gonna break at right angles. So if this does fail, if I stab someone hard enough with this to break it, I don't know if I could, but if I did, it would just kind of like rip more than shatter. And so that extra flexibility that comes with these actual rubber knives doesn't mean you have to be able to paint them with something that's flexible. And that's why I've been using flexible latex paints and rub and buff and stuff like that. I think I've got other videos talking about that. But these are going to be a little bit better for things like falling off a horse or doing a high fall or whatever with something on your belt, because if it breaks, you don't want a sharp corner on your hip. This rubber is not going to break. And if it does, it's not going to break with a sharp corner. 3D printed, it might. It might. It could shatter if you fall on it, and it could have a bit of a sharp corner when it does. So these are not necessarily stunt props, but they are safer props for certain things. And they can certainly be made cheaper once you get things dialed in and figure out the designs and source those. So it has its use. I don't think it's an answer for everything, certainly, but for some things, sure. So this has been another Fight Designer LLC video. If you have any questions, comments, I'm always curious to know if these are useful to anybody or what they're doing with the information, or if there's something else you want to know. I do run a prop weapons rental business. Usually I put the firearm stuff on the PewTube channel, and everything else, swords, knives, props, theater, masks, puppets, whatever. I've been doing a lot with masks lately, on this channel. So I do take requests. I might do something about the arm stilts that I've been playing with in movement class this year, because there's been some interest in that just on my Instagram video that I put up. And I might be selling some of those off, so if you're interested, let me know. But anyway, till next time, I'm Kevin Inoue, and thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, stay uninfected, stay productive if you can, and if not, have a nice rest. And I'll see you next time.